Nobody really paid attention to the old piano in the corner of the hospital lobby. It had been sitting there for years, right next to a fake plant that nobody watered because it was fake, and a notice board full of flyers that were so old, some of the events on them had happened 2 years ago. The piano was just there, like furniture, like wallpaper. People walked past it every single day and never gave it a second look. The nurses didn't touch it. The doctors definitely didn't touch it. Patients who came in holding their backs or cradling their arms would sometimes glance at it for half a second. 10 Luke away. Visitors rushing in with flowers and worried faces had no time for pianos. And the security guard at the front, a big, quiet man who had worked there for over a decade, had gotten so used to seeing it that he genuinely forgot it was there most days. It was just a piano in hospital that nobody played. Until one Tuesday afternoon in November. The weather that day was the kind of gray that makes everything feel a little heavier. The sky wasn't storming or dramatic. It was just flat and dull, like a ceiling that had come down too low. People coming through the hospital doors were shaking the cold off their coats and rubbing their hands together. The lobby was doing what hospital lobbies do, buzzing quietly with that strange mix of urgency and waiting. Someone was being called over the intercom. A child was asking her mother a question that her mother didn't have the energy to answer. A man in the corner was staring at his phone but not really looking at it. And then the doors opened, and an older woman walked in. She was in her late 60s. Silver hair, simply kept, a plain gray coat. She wasn't limping or rushing. She wasn't looking around the way people do when they're lost or looking for someone. She walked in calmly, looked around the lobby for just a moment, and then, as if she had made up her mind about something, she walked straight toward the piano in the corner. The receptionist glanced up, then went back to her screen. The woman sat down on the old bench, set her small handbag on the floor beside her feet, and placed both hands on the keys. There was a brief second where nothing happened, just a woman sitting at a piano, in a hospital on a gray Tuesday, and then she started to play. What came out of that piano was not what anyone in that lobby was expecting. It wasn't a nursery rhyme. It wasn't something cheerful and polite. It wasn't the kind of playing where you smile and nod and go back to what you were doing. It was Chopin, a nocturne, the kind of music that doesn't ask for your attention. It just takes it quietly, completely, without asking permission. The sound moved through the lobby the way certain smells do. You don't see it coming. You don't choose to notice it. You just suddenly realize it's already inside you. The notes rose and fell slowly, like breathing, like someone saying something very important in a language you don't speak, but somehow you understand every word. The receptionist stopped typing. The security guard looked up from the corner. A nurse who had been walking quickly toward the elevator slowed down, then stopped. She stood there in the middle of the lobby holding a clipboard she forgot she was holding. The man who had been staring at his phone put it face down on his knee, one by one. Without anyone organizing it or announcing it, the whole lobby just stopped. Stop. There was a young boy, maybe 15 or 16, sitting in one of the far-waiting chairs. He had been there for hours. His father had been taken into surgery that morning, and nobody had come out to tell him anything yet. He had spent those hours trying to look calm, trying to look older than he was, staring at the floor, staring at the ceiling, going to get a cup of water. He didn't drink, coming back and sitting down again. When the music started, he didn't look up right away, but after a minute, something happened to his face. The tightness around his jaw loosened. His shoulders, which had been pulled up toward his ears without him realizing it, slowly dropped. His eyes got glassy. He blinked, looked at the piano, looked at the woman playing it, and then, very quietly, he started to cry. Not in an embarrassing way. Not loudly. Just the kind of crying that happens when you've been holding something tightly for too long and something beautiful comes along and, for just a moment, you forget to keep holding it. He wiped his face quickly, looked around to see if anyone noticed. Nobody was looking at him, because almost everyone else in that lobby was doing the same thing. An older gentleman near the window had his eyes closed. His wife was somewhere in this hospital getting test results that neither of them had talked about out loud, but both of them had been terrified of 4 weeks. He hadn't cried once in those weeks. He was from a generation that didn't do that. You stayed strong. You kept it together. You dealt with things. But sitting there with that music wrapping around him, his chin trembled. Just once. He pressed his lips together hard, but his eyes, when he finally opened them, were wet. A hospital cleaner, pushing a cart down the side hallway, stopped walking. She leaned against her cart and listened. She had worked in this hospital for 8 years. She had seen a lot of things in these hallways, things that stay with you, things you take home at night whether you want to or not. She was not a woman who cried eyes, but something about the music in T.I.'s plays on this particular afternoon hit differently. She turned her face slightly away from the lobby and just let herself feel it for a moment. Even the security guard, that big, broad-shouldered, seen-everything man, had to clear his throat and look at the ceiling for a second. The woman at the piano played like she wasn't thinking about being watched. Her eyes were sometimes closed, sometimes just soft and distant. Her hands moved across the keys, the way hands move when they've known something for a very long time. Not carefully, not mechanically, but the way you'd move around your own home in the dark. Easily, naturally. From memory that lives in the fingers, not just the brain. She wasn't performing. That was the thing. There was no showmanship, no dramatic pauses for effect, no glancing up to see how people were reacting. She was just playing. For herself, maybe, or for the room, or for something she felt that morning when she woke up and decided, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, to come here. The music lasted about 4 minutes. 4 minutes is not a long time. You can watch 4 minutes of something on your phone and feel nothing at all. But those 4 minutes in that hospital lobby felt like something completely different. They felt like a door opening in a wall you didn't know had a door. When the last note finally faded, and it faded slowly, the way good music does, like it doesn't want to leave, the lobby stayed quiet. Not the usual hospital quiet, where the silence is just the gap between one noise and the next. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that happens after something real. It lasted about 5 seconds. And then someone began to clap. Softly at first. Then a few more people joined. Then more. The woman at the piano sat still for a moment. Then she turned around on the bench, looked at the small crowd that had gathered without anyone noticing it gather, and she smiled. Not a big smile, just a real one. And somewhere across the lobby, the teenage boy who had been trying so hard to look older than he was caught her eye. And she gave him a small nod, the kind that says, "Asterisk, I see you. You're going to be okay." Asterisk, and nodded back. He believed her. Nobody moved for a moment after the clapping faded. It was like everyone in that lobby had just woken up from the same dream at the same time and weren't quite sure what to do with themselves. People looked at each other, strangers who had never made eye contact before. And there was something different in those looks. Not awkward. Not the usual polite blankness of a waiting room. Something softer. Something that said, without words, asterisk. Yeah, I felt that too. Asterisk. Then slowly, the way a room does, after something unexpected, people began to drift back to their own worlds. The receptionist turned back to her screen. The nurse with the clipboard remembered where she was going. Phones came back out, but everything moved a little slower now, a little more gently, like the music had asked the whole room to just breathe for a while. The woman at the piano sat quietly on the bench for another moment. She wasn't rushing. She picked up a handbag from the floor, stood up, smoothed her coat, and looked at the piano once more, the way you look at something you've just had a good conversation with. Then a hospital administrator came walking across the lobby toward her. He had heard the music from down the hallway. He was the kind of man who kept things moving. Scheduling, staffing, policies, paperwork. Not cold, just busy. Always busy. He had been in the middle of reading something on his phone when the sound reached him, and without really deciding to, he had stopped walking and just listened from the hallway entrance. He had lost his mother in this hospital. 3rd floor, room 14, 3 years ago. Almost exactly. He hadn't let himself think about that in a long time. Not because he didn't care, but because there was always something else that needed his attention. Always a reason to keep moving forward and not look back. But standing in that hallway, hearing that music come drifting out of the lobby, something inside him just gave way. Like a wall that had been holding back water for too long, finally finding a crack. He didn't cry in the hallway. He kept it together, but his chest hurt in that deep. quiet way it sometimes does when your heart is trying to tell you something your brain has been refusing to hear. He walked into the lobby. His original plan was to politely check whether the woman had cleared it with anyone before sitting down at the piano. That was his job, after all. Procedures existed for a reason. But when he reached her and she looked up at him with that calm, unhurried expression, the question he had planned to ask completely left him. Instead he said, simply, "That was really something." She smiled. "This piano needed to be played," she said. "It's been waiting." He nodded like that, made perfect sense, even though if anyone else had said it, he might have found it odd. He asked her, gently, why she had come. Not in a challenging way, just curious. She was quiet for a second. Tense aside, I just felt like these walls needed a little music today. He didn't have a single thing to say to that. He just nodded again, thanked her, and walked back toward his office. His colleague found him there a few minutes later, sitting at his desk. Not reading anything, not on his phone. Just sitting. "You all right?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "I think I will be," he said. Word travels fast in a hospital. Not the official kind of fast, not announcements or emails, but the quiet, hallway kind of fast. A nurse tells another nurse. A porter mentions it to someone on the second floor. By the end of that afternoon, half the staff had heard that something had happened in the lobby. Something small, but real. The woman in the gray coat came back the following Tuesday. Same time. Same bench. Same quiet way of sitting down and placing her hands on the keys, like she was greeting an old friend. This time, a few people were already waiting. Not in an obvious way. Not like a crowd gathered for a show, but nurses who happened to be on their break sitting nearby. A porter leaning against the wall with a paper cup of tea. People who had arranged to be in that part of the building at that particular time without saying out loud that they had arranged it. She played for about 20 minutes that day. Different pieces. Some slow and aching. One that was almost playful, lighter, that made an elderly woman in a wheelchair close her eyes and sway ever so slightly. When she finished, the security guard, who the week before had looked at the ceiling and cleared his throat, started the clapping before anyone else did. He did it quickly, firmly, like he had been planning to and wasn't going to let the moment pass this time. The woman laughed softly. "You're all very kind," she said. "No," said the nurse, who had stopped walking with the clipboard the week before. "You are." There was a palliative care nurse who worked on one of the upper floors. Her job was the kind that most people don't like to think about too much. She sat with people at the end. She held hands. She said quiet things in quiet rooms. She was very good at her job, and her job was one of the hardest in the building. She had started coming down to the lobby on Tuesday afternoons whenever she could. She said later, when someone asked her about it, that the music did something she had never quite found a clinical word for. "People up here are carrying things," she said, gesturing loosely at the floors above. "Heavy things, and sometimes they need permission to put the weight down for a second. Even just for a second." She paused. That music gives them that. She wasn't the only one who noticed. A doctor who had worked in emergency medicine for over 20 years. A man who had trained himself not to feel too much because feeling too much in his job can slow you down. Found himself standing in the lobby one Tuesday and realizing his eyes were burning. He stood very still and breathed through it. Later, walking back to his department, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. It felt human, not like a doctor who's the person. He found that strange and necessary in equal measure. A few months in, the hospital put a small sign on the piano, handwritten, in neat letters, slipped into a little frame. "Reserved Tuesdays, 2 p.m. Eleanor plays ... That was the first time most of the staff learned her name. A local journalist heard about her eventually and came to write a small piece. He sat in the lobby one Tuesday and watched the whole thing, the way the room shifted when she started playing. The faces, the stillness. He had written hundreds of stories. He was not easily moved by things. He sat in that lobby and took notes with slightly less steady handwriting than usual. When he spoke to her afterward, he asked the question everyone wanted answered. Why here? Why a hospital, of all places? She didn't need long to think about it. Because the people who walk through those doors, she said, nodding toward the entrance, are usually walking in carrying the hardest moment of their life. Or they're about to. Or they've just come out of one. She looked around the lobby quietly. The least I can do is remind them while they're here. In this place that can feel so cold and so frightening, that beauty still exists. That it didn't go anywhere. That it's still right here, in the same room as them. The journalist wrote it all down, but he said afterward that reading it back on the page never quite captured what it felt like to hear her say it. Some things are like that. The teenage boy whose father had been in surgery that first Tuesday, his father came through fine, recovered slowly, came home. But the boy never forgot those 4 minutes in the lobby. Years later, he would try to explain it to people and always struggled to find the right words. It was just a woman playing piano, he would say, in a hospital, on a random Tuesday. He would shake his head slightly, but it felt like someone had opened a window in a room that had been closed for a very long time. And that, really, is the whole story. A piano that nobody played, a woman who felt called to play it, and a room full of people who didn't know how much they needed to hear it. Until they did.